how much work is too much, how many games, how many minutes, and how much load. But nobody is asking the other question. What type of work protects? So by the end of this video, you're gonna have a specific protocol that you can use with your athletes right away. This is The Blueprint, a series on what actually keeps athletes on the field and performing at their highest. I've lived this work, and now I'm sharing everything that I've learned. 15 years in performance, over 1,200 coaches, professional teams, athletes at every level, and all that was built on one belief. Every coach deserves access to what actually works. Here's your access. So this is what we're going to be covering: why load management creates the injuries it's trying to prevent, the drop spike pattern, and how to spot it in your own data, 3 mechanisms that explain why sprinting protects athletes, a 4-principle speed exposure protocol you can start using immediately, a specific audit you can run on your roster this week. So if you coach athletes who run, cut, or sprint in any sport, this is for you. So let's talk about where the logic starts to break first. So the modern load management era accelerated around 2016. That's when Tim Gabbett actually published the acute to chronic workload ratio framework. So this research showed that injury risk was not just about how hard you train, it was also about how hard you train relative to what you were actually prepared for. So we see athletes in the range of 0.8 to 1.3 had the lowest injury rates, above a 1.5 risk spiked, and the industry looked at this and heard one message: keep the load low, rest more, and subtract. But that is not what the data said. The athletes with the lowest injury rates weren't necessarily the ones who trained the least. They were the ones who trained consistently and were prepared for what they faced. So the takeaway was prepare appropriately. The industry heard do less, but those aren't the same instructions. So let's walk through a scenario together. You've probably lived this one or coached this one. So you have an athlete sprinting consistently. They're hitting high speed thresholds 3, maybe 4 times a week. Tissues are adapted, neuromuscular system is sharp, and they're ready for competition. Then something happens, whether it's a minor knock, a congested schedule, maybe a decision to rest them. So for 2 weeks, maybe 3, their high speed exposure drops. Then they come back, full training, full game, and now their acute load is a spike relative to their recent preparation. So the rest created the risk, not because rest is bad, because rest without a return to speed protocol left them unprepared for what came next. So in American football, this happens every year. Prospects peak at the combine in February. They get drafted, they spend May through July in meeting rooms and walkthroughs, and then training camp starts. Full intensity, multiple sessions in the heat. So you can do the math. Same pattern in basketball after All-Star break, in handball after international windows, in soccer after injury layoffs. So anywhere there's a gap in high speed exposure followed by a return to full intensity. So now you see the pattern. The question is why? So why does consistent sprinting protect athletes? And the answer has 3 parts that every coach needs to understand, because each one changes what you program. So when an athlete sprints, the hamstrings and other hip extensors get loaded at long muscle lengths under high force at high velocities. And this is a stimulus that really can't be replicated with anything that you're gonna do in the gym. So a Nordic curl, for example, is very valuable. I program Nordics, but a Nordic curl itself doesn't replicate the fascial behavior, the contraction velocity, or the coordination pattern of sprinting at near max speed. So sprinting creates tissue that can handle sprinting. Most programs train around sprinting, so they're isolating muscles, they're loading them slowly, and hope the transfer happens automatically, or just assuming that they sprint enough in practice. And the research says that is generally not the case. So sprinting isn't just a muscular event, it's also a timing event. You have hip extension and knee flexion, which have to fire in sequence. You have agonists and antagonists that have to co-contract with precision. The stretch shortening cycle has to be rehearsed in a way. So when athletes go 2 or 3 weeks without sprinting, they don't just lose tissue tolerance, they also lose their timing. And when the timing is off at high speeds, that's when tissues fail. So research on workload and injury, including Gabbett's original data, shows a J-shaped curve. So very low chronic workloads, elevated risk. Very high chronic workloads, elevated risk. So in the middle is where we have our protection. So the implication is that doing too little is also a risk, not just doing too much. So athletes who avoid high-speed running, whether by choice, by program design, or by well-intentioned load management, may actually be placing themselves in a higher risk category than athletes who sprint regularly. And I know that this is kind of the uncomfortable part, because it means that some of the decisions that you're making to protect your athletes might actually be the decisions that are exposing them. Next up, the protocol that you can use. But before we get there, Quick word from our sponsor.
Yeah, so it's me. I'm the sponsor. Because if you're watching this and you think to yourself, well, I see this all the time in my team or my environment, but I'm just not sure where to start. Well, you're not alone. That's actually the most common problem that I hear from coaches and performance staff. The problems are very visible, but the path forward, maybe not so much, which is why I do the Insight Call. It's a free conversation. You walk me through your situation and I ask the questions that usually surface the real issue at hand. And by the end of the call, you have a clear picture on what to focus on first. And I've done this across 30 plus teams in 14 different countries. So this is built on experience. So if you're interested, the link to book a call is in the description. Now let's get back to it.
So now that you understand the pattern and the mechanisms, here's what we do about it. 4 principles, each one is something that you can and should apply this week. Principle 1, frequency over volume. So it's better to sprint 3 times per week at moderate volume than once per week at high volume. The goal is to keep the neuromuscular system engaged and the tissues loaded regularly. Pre-practice, where you do 3 flying 20-meter sprints at 90% effort, and that can be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example. So the total time added to your warm-up would be 4 minutes if you do it right. So look at match day -3, match day -1. And you can include 2 to 4 near max sprints within the technical warm-up. Your practice days, you could do 3 build-up sprints through 30 meters, accelerate through 20. The point isn't to exhaust the athlete, it's to keep the system sharp, short, frequent, and intentional. Principle 2, protect the threshold, not just the volume. Let's look at athlete A, who has 400 meters of high-speed running this week. Max velocity reach was 78% of their individual max. Compared to athlete B, who had 280 meters of high-speed running this week, their max velocity reach was 94% of their individual max. So athlete A logged more high-speed meters. Athlete B is better protected because the structural and neuromuscular adaptations require exposure to near maximum velocities, not just volume above an arbitrary line. Principle 3, program the return and not just the rest. So when an athlete comes back from any break, whether it's injury, international duty, a planned rest week, the return to high-speed running needs to be graded. Not one session of, well, just see how you feel. You need a structured progression. And this could take a few days, but a lot of return to play processes skip it entirely. They test strength, they test range of motion, they might add some running, but they rarely include a structured speed progression. And principle 4, monitor consistency and not just load. So again, athlete A had 12 consecutive weeks at threshold. Athlete B, 7 out of 12 weeks with gaps. Both athletes might have similar total volume across the season, but their injury risk profiles are different. Every gap is a potential setup for a spike. So how many consecutive weeks has this athlete reached above 85% of their individual max velocity? If it's fewer than 4, then they're probably vulnerable. 8 or more, then they're more protected. You don't necessarily need new software to track this. A spreadsheet works, a whiteboard works, the tool doesn't matter, the habit of checking matters. So here's where I want to leave you. Not with a concept, but with a task. Step 1, pull your high-speed running data from the last 8 weeks. If you use GPS, export the max velocity data per athlete per session. If you don't have GPS, use your coaching eyes. So were they actually sprinting or just running fast? Step 2, for each athlete, answer 1 question per week. Did they reach above 90% of their individual maximum velocity? Yes or no? Step 3, you're gonna flag anybody who has 3 or more no weeks in the last 8. And those athletes are your risk cases. So their high-speed tolerance has more than likely decayed a bit. Step 4, you're gonna build a return to speed plan for each flagged athlete. So use the graded protocol from earlier. 5 exposures over 10 days, for example. So this audit might take 30 minutes, maybe an hour if you have a bigger team, and it gives you something most performance departments do not have, a clear picture of who is structurally prepared for competition and who's not. Load management isn't wrong. Rest definitely isn't the enemy, but the conversation has been focused on subtraction for far too long. The question isn't just how much can we take away? The question is, what should we keep? Speed exposure is one of the things that you absolutely have to keep. So the best availability systems with which I've worked don't just monitor load, they protect exposures that matter most. And speed, dosed consistently, tracked simply, restored deliberately after any break, is one of those exposures. So if you want to go deeper on how availability systems actually work, so how to move from data to decisions, come visit me at the link in the bio. And if you want to run the audit and want a second pair of eyes on what you find, the link to book a call is also in the description.